For most of human history, reality was shaped by forces the human mind could intuitively grasp. Seasons changed, empires rose and fell, wars were won or lost, and even when events were tragic or mysterious, people could place them inside familiar mental frameworks. Cause followed effect at a pace aligned with human perception. A farmer understood weather patterns, a ruler understood power through armies and land, and a merchant understood value through tangible goods. Logic functioned because reality moved slowly enough for the mind to follow. That alignment is now breaking. Reality is no longer constructed around human-scale understanding. It is increasingly shaped by vast interconnected systems that operate beyond direct perception. Financial markets respond to signals traveling at near light speed. Climate systems react to industrial decisions made decades ago and expressed through nonlinear feedback loops. Digital platforms continuously modify social behavior without any single designer fully understanding the consequences. The world no longer behaves like a machine with visible gears. It behaves like an ecosystem of algorithms interacting with other ecosystems, each producing outcomes that even their creators struggle to explain. The logical mind seeks linear explanations. It asks, if this happened, what caused it? But modern reality often answers with probabilities instead of causes, correlations instead of reasons. A market crashes not because of one decision, but because millions of automated trades respond to patterns invisible to humans. A political movement explodes not because of ideology alone, but because recommendation systems amplify emotional content in unpredictable ways. A cultural shift occurs not because people consciously chose it, but because attention was gradually redirected by invisible incentives. This creates a paradox. Education has never been more advanced, yet understanding has never felt more elusive. People are taught to analyze, compare, and reason, but the systems governing their lives do not reveal themselves through reasoning alone. They are too complex, too fast, too opaque. The result is widespread confusion, not among the ignorant, but among the educated. Human logic evolved to navigate small groups and immediate threats. It is excellent at detecting patterns in face-to-face interactions, at predicting behavior within limited social circles, and at responding to direct feedback. It is not designed to intuit global supply chains, neural networks, or emergent behaviors in complex systems. When logical minds confront these systems, they often mistake confidence for understanding. They build simplified narratives to regain a sense of control, even when those narratives are dangerously incomplete. As reality grows more complex, the temptation to cling to outdated mental models intensifies. People double down on familiar ideologies, not because those ideologies explain the world better, but because they reduce cognitive discomfort. Simplicity becomes emotional refuge. This is why complexity does not automatically produce wisdom. Often, it produces denial. At the same time, authority is quietly shifting away from human judgment. For centuries, power belonged to those who could persuade, command, or inspire other humans. Today, power increasingly belongs to those who design, own, or influence data-driven systems. Decisions about credit, employment, medical treatment, and even personal relationships are increasingly mediated by algorithms that do not think in stories or values, but in optimization functions. These systems do not ask whether something feels meaningful or fair. They ask whether it works according to measurable criteria. And because they continuously learn from vast datasets, they often outperform humans in prediction. They can anticipate preferences, detect risks, and optimize outcomes with uncanny accuracy. This does not mean they are wise. It means they are effective. The unsettling consequence is that knowledge is becoming decoupled from consciousness. For most of history, to know something meant that a human mind understood it. Today, a system can know without understanding in the human sense. It can recognize patterns without awareness, draw conclusions without insight, and act without intention. The logical human mind, trained to seek meaning, struggles to compete with this form of intelligence. As data accumulates, systems begin to know individuals more intimately than individuals know themselves. Patterns of behavior reveal desires people would deny, fears they cannot articulate, and habits they barely notice. Choices that feel spontaneous are often predictable long before they are made. This challenge is one of the most deeply held assumptions of modern culture, that individuals are autonomous decision makers guided by rational thought. When systems predict behavior more accurately than self-reflection, the role of logic changes. It no longer governs decisions, it justifies them after the fact. People construct rational explanations for choices that were nudged, influenced, or optimized by forces they never saw. Logic becomes a storytelling tool, not a steering mechanism. This does not mean human reasoning is obsolete. It means its function is shifting. The danger lies in assuming that sharper logic alone can restore control. No amount of individual reasoning can fully map systems that exceed individual cognition. Mastery now depends less on understanding every detail and more on recognizing where understanding is no longer possible. Education systems still train minds as if reality were saint, able and transparent. They reward certainty, consistency, and clear answers. But the emerging world rewards adaptability, humility, and the ability to operate under uncertainty. The logical mind wants closure. The future offers none. In this environment, the most important skill is not prediction but orientation. Knowing where to place attention becomes more valuable than knowing how to solve every problem. Focus is no longer a productivity technique, it is a survival strategy. Without it, individuals are overwhelmed by information that exceeds their capacity to process or evaluate. The loss of comprehensibility does not arrive with a dramatic collapse. It arrives quietly, through the accumulation of small mismatches between how people think the world works and how it actually functions. Trust erodes not because systems fail, but because no one can explain them. Responsibility blurs, not because no one is accountable, but because accountability is distributed across layers of automation. The logical mind feels betrayed by this reality. It was promised that reason would lead to progress, clarity, and control. Instead, reason now confronts a world where outcomes emerge without intention and power operates without narrative. This does not invalidate logic, but it exposes its limits. Understanding those limits is not a defeat, it is an education. Those who insist on absolute explanations will grow increasingly frustrated. Those who accept partial understanding, probabilist, I-see thinking, and systemic awareness will navigate the future with greater resilience. The question is no longer whether reality makes sense, but whether humans can function effectively in a world that does not pause to be understood. The shift is already underway. The only choice left is whether to remain anchored to an outdated image of rational control or to develop a new relationship with uncertainty, one grounded not in illusion, but in disciplined attention and intellectual humility. For centuries, human societies were held together by shared stories. These stories were not necessarily true in any objective sense, but they were powerful because millions of people believed in them at the same time. Nations, religions, money, human rights, and even the idea of progress existed because they lived in collective imagination. These narratives simplified reality. They told people who they were, what mattered, who held authority, and what the future should look like. A farmer in the past did not need to understand global systems. The story of their village, their god, and their ruler was enough to make the world intelligible. Today, these unifying stories are losing their force. Not because humans have become more skeptical or enlightened, but because reality has become too fragmented to fit into a single narrative. Digital technology has shattered the shared stage on which collective myths once performed. Instead of one story broadcast to millions, there are now millions of stories tailored to individuals. Each person inhabits a personalized information universe, shaped by algorithms that optimize engagement rather than truth or meaning. Two people living in the same city may consume entirely different realities, with different facts, fears, and moral priorities. When shared stories dissolve, social cohesion weakens, and the very idea of a common future becomes difficult to sustain. This fragmentation creates a paradox. Never before have humans been so connected, yet never before have they been so divided in their understanding of the world. In earlier eras, disagreements occurred within a common framework. People argued about interpretations of the same events. Today, people argue about what events even happened. When reality itself is contested, persuasion gives way to manipulation, and dialogue turns into noise. Power shifts to those who control attention, because attention is now the scarce resource. Whoever can dominate attention can shape reality, not by convincing people of the truth, but by deciding which version of reality they encounter in the first place. The erosion of shared narratives also destabilizes authority. Traditional institutions, governments, universities, media were once trusted storytellers. They claimed to explain the world and guide collective decision-making. As their narratives fracture, trust evaporates. People no longer ask whether a story is true, they ask whether it aligns with their identity or emotions. In such an environment, facts struggle to compete with feelings, and expertise competes poorly with confidence. This does not mean that humans have stopped seeking meaning. On the contrary, the hunger for meaning intensifies as old stories collapse. But instead of grand, unifying myths, people cling to smaller, more fragile narratives that define them against others rather than with others. At the same time, the speed at which reality changes has become a decisive force in human history. For most of our existence, the world changed slowly enough for cultural adaptation to keep pace. Skills learned in childhood remained useful for a lifetime. Moral codes evolved over centuries. Today, change accelerates beyond biological and cultural comfort. Technologies reshape economies, politics, and identities within a single decade. By the time societies understand one transformation, another has already begun. This speed does not merely challenge institutions, it challenges the human nervous system. The gap between fast and slow is becoming the new dividing line of humanity. It is no longer wealth alone that determines power, but adaptability. Those who can learn, unlearn, and relearn at high speed gain influence. Those who cannot are left behind, not because they lack intelligence, but because they are trapped in outdated mental models. The danger is not that machines will suddenly replace humans, but that humans will become irrelevant to systems they no longer understand or influence. When decision-making moves faster than reflection, power concentrates in the hands of those who design and control the systems, not those who live under them. Speed also erodes responsibility. When events unfold rapidly, there is little time to ask ethical questions. Decisions are justified as necessary reactions rather than deliberate choices. This creates a culture of permanent urgency, where long-term consequences are ignored in favor of short-term optimization. The faster the system moves, the harder it becomes to stop it, question it, or redirect it. Humans pride themselves on being moral agents. Yet morality requires time. Time to reflect, to doubt, to imagine alternatives. In a world governed by speed, morality risks becoming a luxury. Education, which once promised stability, now struggles to keep up. Teaching people fixed bodies of knowledge makes little sense when information becomes obsolete quickly. The crucial skill is no longer knowing answers, but knowing how to adapt when answers change. This demands psychological resilience more than technical expertise. The ability to tolerate uncertainty, to remain functional without clear narratives, becomes essential. Ironically, the faster the world moves, the more valuable inner stability becomes. Without it, individuals are swept along by forces they neither understand nor control. The combination of narrative collapse and accelerating speed creates a profound existential challenge. Humans evolved to seek meaning in coherent stories and to operate at manageable tempos. When both coherence and tempo disappear, anxiety fills the vacuum. Many respond by retreating into simplistic explanations or rigid identities. Others surrender agency altogether, trusting systems to decide for them. Neither response addresses the root problem. The challenge is not to restore old stories or slow down history, but to develop new forms of understanding that accept complexity without being paralyzed by it. In this emerging reality, power belongs to those who can operate without complete understanding. This sounds counterintuitive to logical minds trained to seek clarity before action. Yet the future increasingly demands action under uncertainty. The skill is not perfect comprehension, but intelligent navigation. This requires humility, the recognition that no single perspective can grasp the whole, and discipline, the ability to focus on what matters despite overwhelming information. Those who master these skills can move with purpose even when the map is incomplete. Ultimately, the loss of shared stories and the rise of speed do not mark the end of humanity's search for meaning. They mark a transition. Meaning will no longer be handed down by grand narratives or stable institutions. It will have to be constructed consciously, continuously, and often privately. This is a heavy burden, but also an opportunity. In a world that no longer explains itself, the capacity to learn, adapt, and remain focused becomes not just a survival tool, but a defining human achievement. Confusion is not a temporary malfunction in the system. It is the system's natural state at scale. As networks grow more complex, transparency does not increase, it evaporates. When millions of humans, billions of devices, and trillions of data points interact in real time, the result is not clarity but opacity. No single authority, expert, or institution fully understands the system it depends on. Even the architects of these structures see only fragments. This is not a failure of intelligence, it is a structural limit. The human brain evolved to navigate small groups, linear cause and effect, and slow-moving threats. It did not evolve to grasp nonlinear systems operating at machine speed. As complexity rises, predictability falls. Yet modern societies are built on the dangerous assumption that someone, somewhere, is still in control. In reality, decisions emerge from the interaction of countless subsystems, financial algorithms, political incentives, media dynamics, biological feedback loops, none of which possess a complete picture. Confusion therefore becomes a feature, because systems that are too complex to fully understand are also too complex to resist. When responsibility is distributed across networks, accountability dissolves. No one pulls the lever, yet everyone feels the consequences. In such an environment, confusion serves power. When reality cannot be easily mapped, individuals lose the ability to orient themselves. They rely instead on signals, notifications, headlines, trends, metrics that promise guidance but deliver dependence. Complexity generates anxiety, and anxiety drives people to surrender judgment. They look for simple explanations, strong leaders, or comforting narratives, even when those narratives are false. The more confusing the world becomes, the more attractive certainty appears. This is why misinformation spreads faster than truth, not because people are stupid, but because clarity is scarce. Simple stories outperform accurate ones in a complex environment. Confusion, then, is not merely tolerated, it is monetized, weaponized, and optimized. Platforms profit from engagement, not understanding. Political systems benefit from distraction rather than deliberation. Economic systems reward speed over reflection. The result is a permanent fog in which individuals react continuously but rarely comprehend. Education was once designed to reduce confusion by transmitting stable knowledge. Today, knowledge itself expires rapidly. Skills learned at the beginning of life may be obsolete before midlife. Facts are revised, models collapse, and expert consensus shifts. This does not mean that education has failed. It means that the goal of education must change. The crucial skill is no longer memorization or even analysis, but the ability to remain functional amid uncertainty, to operate without a complete map, to make decisions while knowing that the information is partial, biased, and provisional. Confusion becomes a test. Those who panic search for dogma. Those who adapt learn to navigate probability rather than certainty. The danger lies not in confusion itself, but in the human tendency to escape it prematurely. When confusion is unavoidable, the decisive factor becomes focus. Focus is not mere concentration. It is the capacity to choose what matters and ignore what does not. In earlier eras, attention was guided by scarcity. Information was limited and access was controlled. Today, attention is the scarce resource, while information is infinite. Every system competes for human awareness because awareness can be converted into data, influence, and profit. In this environment, losing focus is not a personal failure. It is the default outcome of exposure. The individual who does not actively defend attention will surrender it. Focus therefore becomes an act of resistance against systems designed to fragment the mind. Focus allows humans to retain agency in an incomprehensible world. When you cannot understand the whole, you must decide which part deserves your energy. This decision shapes identity, values, and action. Without focus, individuals become reactive nodes, responding endlessly to external stimuli. With focus, they regain the ability to act rather than merely respond. This distinction is critical. Systems thrive on reaction. Markets fluctuate on panic and excitement. Political movements exploit outrage and fear. Media ecosystems amplify whatever provokes immediate emotion. Focus interrupts this cycle. It introduces delay, perspective, and intention. It creates a space between stimulus and response, and in that space, freedom reappears. However, focus is increasingly difficult because it contradicts the economic logic of the digital age. Many of the most powerful institutions depend on distraction. Their success is measured in clicks, views, and engagement time. These metrics reward fragmentation, not coherence. The more divided attention becomes, the more predictable human behavior is at scale. Focused individuals are harder to model, harder to manipulate, and harder to monetize. This is why focus feels unnatural today. It runs against the grain of the environment. Maintaining it requires deliberate effort, structural boundaries, and often social cost. Yet without it, individuals drift into passivity, mistaking constant activity for meaningful action. Focus also reshapes learning. In a world where no one can master everything, depth becomes more valuable than breadth. This does not mean narrowing curiosity, but anchoring it. A focused mind can engage with complexity without being overwhelmed because it knows its priorities. It accepts ignorance in many areas in order to cultivate understanding in a few. This is not a retreat from reality, it is a strategy for surviving it. When everything competes for attention, choosing what to ignore is as important as choosing what to study. Focus, therefore, is not about exclusion. It is about orientation. It gives direction in a landscape that no longer offers clear paths. There is also a moral dimension to focus. Attention determines what we care about. What we notice becomes real. What we ignore fades from concern. When attention is hijacked by trivialities, moral judgment weakens. Large-scale issues, climate systems, technological governance, biological risks, unfold slowly and demand sustained focus. They do not generate constant novelty. As a result, they struggle to compete with immediate distractions. A society unable to focus cannot address long-term challenges. It oscillates between crises without resolving any of them. Focus, then, is not just a personal skill, it is a collective necessity. As reality becomes less comprehensible, the temptation is to simplify it aggressively, to reduce it to slogans, enemies, or myths. Focus offers an alternative. It does not deny complexity, nor does it pretend to resolve it. Instead, it accepts limits and works within them. It asks not for total understanding but for meaningful engagement. It allows individuals to act responsibly even when certainty is impossible. In this sense, focus becomes the last reliable human advantage. Machines excel at processing vast quantities of data, but they do not choose meaning. They optimize objectives given to them. Humans, when focused, still decide which objectives matter. The future will not belong to those who know the most, nor to those who react the fastest. It will belong to those who can sustain attention, resist manipulation, and act with intention amid uncertainty. Confusion will intensify, not diminish. Systems will grow more opaque, faster, and more autonomous. No return to a simpler world awaits. The question is not how to eliminate confusion, but how to live intelligently within it. Focus is the answer not because it restores control over reality, but because it restores control over the self. In an incomprehensible world, that may be the only control left. And it is enough. The world ahead will not slow down for our understanding. Systems will grow more complex, signals more deceptive, and certainty more dangerous. There will be no final explanation that makes everything clear, no single authority that restores order. What will remain is the individual capacity to choose awareness over distraction, intention over reaction. Confusion will persist, but it does an OT have to paralyze. When we accept that not everything can be understood, we gain the freedom to decide what deserves our attention. In that decision lies responsibility, resilience, and meaning. The future will test not our intelligence, but our discipline. Not our knowledge, but our focus. Those who cultivate it will not control the world, but they will remain human within it. Thank you for giving your attention, your time, and your presence. In an age where attention is the most contested resource, your focus matters.
Of dictatorships, of empires or city-states, almost all governments spent more than 50% of their budget on the military. In the early 21st century, countries felt so safe that the average expenditure on the military was just about 6 or 7% of the government budget all over the world. In contrast, about 10% of the budget was spent on healthcare. This was the first time in human history that governments spent more on healthcare, on nurses and doctors and hospitals, than they spent on the military, on soldiers and warships and fortresses. And unfortunately, this is now changing. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with policies of the Trump administration, countries again feel unsecure. They feel the only thing that protects us against invasion and conquest by a stronger country is if we have a bigger military. And countries in Europe, countries in East Asia and elsewhere, they suddenly feel that they cannot rely anymore on the international order. They cannot rely anymore on America. They have to increase their military budgets, build bigger armies. And of course, if everybody does it, you'll have an arms race, and the situation will just keep deteriorating.